The Radio Wammo Breakfast.
Kiwi.
All right, let's stare into the night sky with Dylan Storey. With Dylan Storey's Astronomy. Thanks very much to the Auckland Stardome. G'day there to you, Dylan.
G'day, Wammo. G'day, listeners.
And today we're talking about near-Earth objects or even space junk. There was an interesting story coming out in New Scientist magazine this week that says access to our space or our orbit could be cut off by the debris orbiting Earth. Space junk, if you will. This is a real problem, isn't it, Dylan?
Yeah, well, it could be in the future. It's not at the moment. With so many satellites going up for all sorts of different things, then it could be a problem, because every time you send something up there, there's bits that fall off, there's expendable bits of rockets that sort of stay up there. Now, to sort of get a perspective on it, there's a vast amount of space up there, because we're talking about 3 dimensions, so the chances of something the size of a satellite hitting each other is relatively small, but when you get enough of them all zooming around in different orbits, sooner or later, despite the huge odds, some of them are going to hit, and that's when some of them are going to.
Well, I was going to say, we've also been very careless in the past, haven't we? Like we've exploded stuff up there and not really thought about the future when it comes to avoiding objects in space. Yeah,
that's true. I mean, I think at the start of the space age, they couldn't really foresee this number of near-Earth satellites that would be up there. They didn't know that. They couldn't predict things like GPS and Google Earth and things like that would need satellites and cell phones. They thought it would be sort of humans going into space with just a few sort of bus-type spaceships going up. But it has been careless. I mean, these things, the particles do eventually come back to Earth. Their orbit degrades, and they eventually fall into the atmosphere and burn up. But that can take decades, and decades is too long.
Yeah.
The problem comes when there is a collision, and there has actually been a collision in the last few years, and what that means is it will spread out the junk, it will spread out the particles, because they're going so fast. They're going about 45,000 kilometers per hour. So that means that something the size of a marble or even a grain of sand can do huge damage.
Yeah.
So when satellites collide, they basically completely explode into pieces, and because they're traveling at that speed around that orbit, the particles left over from the collision will spread out and basically occupy that whole orbit. So when you do, even though they can be microparticles, they will then take up an entire band of the sky.
Wow.
So that's where the problem
basically we couldn't put anything into orbit there. So these particles, as you say, are really, really small. So how do we detect them? How do we know they're there?
They're tracked by an agency called NORAD, who have radio telescopes pointing at the sky, and they're actually tracking tens of thousands of particles about of a centimetre or less in diameter.
Wow.
So that's amazing when you think about the amount of data that's there.
Yeah.
But then there's the grain of sand-sized particles, which should also be out there, which could completely wreck the space shuttle, for example, or the International Space Station if they hit it.
Yeah.
So those are the things you just can't predict. They're just one of the, I guess, accepted dangers of going into space at the moment.
Yeah, and I mean, is there any plan at all to clean up some of this stuff?
There's people talking about it. I don't think there's any cohesive plan. I mean, no one really knows. I think the best plan is avoidance. So trying to plan that when a satellite does end its life, to make sure its orbit is degraded so it falls back into Earth and burns up completely in the atmosphere, not just to leave things drifting around there. And likewise with spent rocket stages that fall off the rockets, make sure they actually fall back down to Earth, and make sure satellites that there's a worldwide coordinated effort to make sure satellites aren't in an orbit that could collide.
And of course, yeah, we're talking human-made space junk, but there's plenty of natural, not really junk, but asteroids and pieces of rock that are floating around up there, and well, of course, headed towards Earth as well.
Yeah, well, the same agency that tracks the space junk, NORAD, they also track these near-Earth objects or anything of suitable size that's a potential threat to Earth. And so again, there's tens of thousands of these things that they're monitoring, which are basically bits of rock left over from the formation of the solar system, still whizzing around. And when you think about the age of the solar system, about 5 billion years old, most of the things that were going to hit Earth have hit Earth in the past. But that doesn't mean that something couldn't hit us now. There couldn't be some irregular orbit which will take something into the path of Earth every, say, 65 million years. So they are monitoring anything that could hit Earth, but that doesn't mean to say that something couldn't come out of the blue that they don't see. And
wasn't there a couple of significant ones that passed by pretty close this week?
Yep, they were tracked. They actually went inside the orbit of the moon, so one less than half the distance to the moon. So when you consider the distance of Earth to the sun and Earth to the other things in space, halfway between Earth and the moon is an extremely near miss.
Yeah. Were they significant? Were they big?
They were big. I mean, they were big enough to have caused an apocalypse on Earth if they'd hit.
Gosh, gotta love that word. Apocalypse, total destruction, the end of civilization. Right, okay.
Something like that, yep. But it's not as if these things are just floating around in space and happen to go there. They will be on some kind of synchronous interlocked orbit with the Earth's orbit.
Yeah.
So that they are in an orbit around the sun themselves, and the fact that they passed by Earth every, 100,000 years or whatever, or even every 100 years, if they were going to hit Earth, they would have done it in the past. So it's not, you kind of get the wrong impression by thinking, oh, something just missed us, but it's actually kind of tidally locked into that orbit.
Okay. Well, I'm glad things are so well ordered up there, Dylan. One less thing, hopefully, to worry about.
They're ordered in a kind of unordered way. So basically, any of these, we know all these things that are in this regular synchronous orbit, but as I say, there could be something in much more random orbit that will collide, or will come close enough to get sucked in by our gravity in the future. Or there could be, or one of these objects, as it goes around the other side of the sun, their orbit could be changed slightly by the gravity of something else, by another planet, which means their orbit gets deflected, which means that next time they come round, they are just fractionally closer to us. And that fraction could make them hit us. So there is a real danger from space.
I shall go on pretending that I do not know that. Thanks very much, Dylan.
Thank you, Wammo. There are a lot more things about space when you start finding out what's out there. There's a lot more things you have to pretend you don't really know.
And no doubt over the coming weeks and months, we will find out a whole lot more. Thanks very much. And
delve into that.
Yeah, don't forget to